Well, greetings, aerospace and cyber 2020 attendees. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to our special virtual ASC Aerospace Nation panel, The Right Mix of Stand-in, Standoff Capability. By way of introducing this topic, it's one that the Mitchell Institute has researched and published on, in part because it has implications not only for how the Air Force will shape and size itself for the coming years, but also for how it will operate and how effective it will be. And both have serious implications for the Air Force budget. Over the last 30 years, China and Russia have set out to negate US air power, strike, and missile defense advantages. Consequently, the legacy, ways and means wielded across the services require a major, if not complete, redesign to effectively compete. One enduring capability in the nation's arsenal is global long-range strike, the ability to attack targets anywhere at any time. When paired with an effective campaign strategy and aimed at vital military targets, long-range strike is one of the most cost-effective methods available to America's military commanders. Decisions will soon be required that will reshape how the Department of Defense conducts long-range strikes in the future. Now, recently, the Mitchell Institute published its own analysis entitled Long-Range Strike, Resetting the Balance of Stand-in and Standoff Forces, on how the Department of Defense should strike the right balance between penetrating strike or stand-in strike, using the Air Force's stealth bomber force, and standoff strike, the launching of long-range missiles from aircraft, ships, submarines, and land emplacements. It's Mitchell's conclusion that shifting the balance in favor of long-range standoff systems does not make sense for the Air Force, and it would furthermore lead to overinvestments in the Pentagon's overall standoff strike capacity. And while we recommend the Air Force significantly increase its penetrating long-range strike capacity in the face of great power aggression, we've invited some of the Air Force's top minds responsible for the operational conduct of these missions to weigh in. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Generals Tim Ray, Ken Wilsbach, and Jeff Herrigian. A little bit about each. General Tim Ray is a command pilot with more than 4,000 hours and the commander of Air Force Global Strike Command. He concurrently serves as the commander of Air Force's Strategic Air, United States Strategic Command. In these roles, he's responsible for providing strategic deterrence, global strike, and combat support to U.S. STRATCOM and the other COCOMs. We also welcome General Ken Cruiser Wilsbach, another command pilot with more than 5,000 hours, who serves as commander of Pacific Air Forces and is the air component commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. He carries out these roles and joins us today from Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii. Our final panelist, General Jeff Cobra Herrigian, a command pilot with more than 4,100 hours, is commander of U.S. Air Forces in Europe and Africa, as well as a commander of Allied Air Command headquarters at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. He also serves as the director of the NATO Joint Air Power Competence Center. So thanks to everyone for joining in this important discussion today. With that, I'd like to first extend the opportunity to General Ray to offer some opening comments, followed by Generals Wilsbach and Herrigian, and then we'll be back for some more in-depth discussion. Over to you, General Ray.
All right, Dave, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Hey, so thanks for having this forum, and it's just one of those COVID realities, but it's a real treat to be on the net here with two teammates, guys I've known for a long, long time, and just tremendous airmen and teammates. We worked the Pacific and Europe. I couldn't ask for two better folks to go solve some of these problems with, so it's good to see you guys here. And broadly, I will tell you the leadership team of the Air Force is just remarkably good. I couldn't ask for a better group of folks to work this with. Some broad thoughts here. I'll just get us started, because all three of us have had some particular time in the Middle East working the problems over the past couple of decades. There's been some great work done. We accomplished our goals, saved a lot of Americans and allies. The hard part, though, is all of that never had what I would call an existential dimension, right? There was never any threat to us as the United States that could end us. And so we had the luxury of being able to fight that kind of conflict without a greater set of concerns. But now that we've gone, into this great power competition with two realist players with existential capabilities that could be aimed at us, it just really underscores the NDS and the NPR. The entire focus of the NDS on the long-term strategic competition, where the NPR comes back with the great power competition. Believe it's got, and we can come back to this later, it's got, I think, the right connection between modernization and arms control agreements, which is where the healthy place is. But it really comes back to how well we as a team can turn our hands to the competitive space and how well we do that. When we think about the fact that we haven't fought a nuclear armed adversary before, that we've started every conflict on our own since Korea, it means, we got a very different situation here. And as you think through the force sizing constructs and all that piece, you kind of jump into a logic tree about, the assumptions you're making that's, I don't think, relevant anymore. You've got to really begin this from the strategic to the operational to the tactical, and you've got to solve problems in that order for you to be able to get things correctly balanced. Otherwise, I think you ask yourself some questions that aren't quite as germane. So when we start thinking about that, we really got to find a way to solve, those existential conversations first, as affordably as we can, and then to work our way through it. When I think about what the chief just put out with his guidance, it's tremendous. I think he's got a really good shot as to what we're up against. We're on the clock, and there's not a lot of time left for us. He does emphasize two things I think are important. Of course, it's the air dominance piece, but it's also the fact that we have two legs of the arsenal, right? And that's our nation's survival and the cornerstone and security structure of the free world. Those are important parts. When I consider the problem sets of my teammates here, it's not a one size fits all for either of them. There's some commonality, but in the end, it becomes how well we do at building the force that can meet both of their needs. So when you want to start talking standoff or stand in, you had me at both, right? We need both of those kinds of things to be effective. And I think it's how you best create a competitive advantage. I'm a big believer in standoff, but I also believe you can't get it done without the right kind of stand-in. All three of us have worked the partners and allies dimension. We would very quickly agree with you that one of the most strategic things you can do is to be there to look your partners and allies in the eye and to have that united front against who you're up against. But as you start to work yourself through those problems, none of it really works. If you think about the balance between the two, none of it works unless you really get multi-domain competition left of, no kidding, true kinetics. It doesn't work without JADC2 and APMS. It's got to happen. You got to have resilient kill chains that are going to let you prevail. Can't do it without partners and allies. Agile combat employment, what we're doing with ACE and what we're trying to do with BASE, bomber agile combat employment, dynamic force employment that we're doing with these bomber task forces. You got to have really good modernization that's going to be fast and relevant, right, and affordable and sustainable. And I think one of the most important attributes of the force isn't stand off or stand in, as much as we could say it's a very adaptable force that you could rapidly bring the capabilities and the upgrades and the mods to the force that keeps you relevant across the entire domain. If we can't have those conversations, then we're going to parse things. And of course, that's going to drive us to the right relationships with industry, with science and academia, how we do software, and those other kinds of things. And I think at the end of the day, this really has to be viewed, as Simon Sinek calls it, an infinite game, right? Where we're not all playing by the same rules. There's different equities, different theories of victory. You can't win every week. You got to win over the long haul. And if you're going to do that, you got to have margin in your teams, margin in your resources, margin in your policy, your partners and allies, margin in your technology and how fast you could bring that. I think those are the more important conversations, but absolutely puts, I think, the right focus on how we talk about standoff and stand in.
Very good. Thanks very much. General Herrigian.
Hey, thanks, sir. And thanks to you and the Mitchell Institute for pulling us together. It's a great opportunity, as General Ray highlighted, to get the team together and talk about some very important decisions our nation, our Air Force are going to have to make going forward. I guess what I would offer up front is, as General Ray has highlighted, really over the course of the last year or two, as we've wrapped our minds around the National Defense Strategy and Great Power Competition, it's become blatantly clear to us over here the importance of our bomber force and the long-range strike capabilities that they bring to us. In fact, recently, the tremendous advantage that they bring in terms of, as General Ray highlighted, the importance of competing every day in the environment that we operate today. It truly lends that assurance value to our partners that in our theater here remain critically important to how we are ultimately going to be able to deter and then defend when required. And as he highlighted, I am fully confident that when required, if I need to pick up the phone, we're going to be able to work together to ensure that happens in a very timely manner, which will be critical to the ability to deliver when we're asked to. Further, I would say that, as we look at our broader mission set and that competitive advantage required to execute the air dominance mission set, the bombers and the role they play in long-range strike are an imperative for us here. And finding that right mix will require, I think General Ray used the word adaptable. I would use the word agile approach to how we're going to deliver that capability over time. And so I would ask that, as we continue these conversations, we keep those in mind, because at the end of the day, this will be about delivering a capability for our joint force in a manner that does allow us to compete and deter, hopefully ensuring that we never have to go to the fight that could be there at the end of the road. So with that, I'll hand it back to you and appreciate the time and opportunity to discuss this.
Outstanding. Thanks. Let's turn to the Pacific Theater and hear from General Wilsbach.
Well, thanks, General Deptula, and thanks for having me on. And it is a pleasure to be here with General Herrigian and General Ray. We interact with one another multiple times a week, and unfortunately, we can't be in person for AFA, but really want to thank the Mitchell Institute for taking this on and providing us with this COVID-free opportunity to share our messages. And I'd also like to thank your team. But when we think about this stand-in and stand-out force in the right mix, we really go to the JADC2 Joint All-Domain Command and Control, and we've got to think toward the future of not continuing to do things the same that we have been doing. In other words, a numbers versus numbers, but rather think in terms of capabilities versus capabilities, not just with aircraft and with munitions, but think all kinetic and non-kinetic, and we realize that part of this is the space, just dominating in space, and so we don't have a space U.S. Space Force person in this one. In this VTC, but space is going to be so important to JADC2. And the next part is our allies and partners in the region. And when you think about most of our allies and partners in the Pacific, they don't have a standoff option. They're already in. And so we've got to be there with them. We've got to be interoperable with them. And so that plays into our mix of the stand-in, because if we're there with them, by definition, we're standing in. And then the training opportunities that we have to take advantage of throughout the year, so that we have that interoperability, is so important for the deterrence piece. And as General Ray and General Regan were for speaking, all aspects of what they said. I completely agree with them, and want to thank them for their partnership, because even though we have very different areas of responsibility, we're working together almost every day. And so we've got Bomber Task Force out frequently in the Pacific, and it's been very successful in the first few months of executing that, and we're so thankful for that. And then we've been working also with USAFE and doing some teamed up operations, which I think will also be very good as we take our strategy forward. And then I guess really the last aspect of what we're thinking about with regard to stand in and stand off is taking care of our airmen and families, because many of our airmen and families are standing in because they're deployed inside the threat rings. So base defense and the ability to defend ourselves as we execute is so important. And with that, let me stop there, and we can proceed on. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, John Wilsbach, and each of you for your insights, opening insights on the topic. So let's dig into it a bit more in some detail. General Ray, I know that your local friends at the Louisiana Tech Research Institute recently worked on completing a nuclear deterrence handbook for the airmen of Global Strike Command. And Mitchell Institute's own Mark Gunzinker, excuse me, contributed a chapter on the importance of maintaining the bomber force. Multiple government and as well as independent analyses have concluded that the current bomber force is just simply too small. And while the Air Force has said it needs at least 220 bombers, would you agree that 220 is really a living number that's going to change over time? And what are some of the key factors that could further increase the Air Force's bomber requirements?
Dave, I think, 220 is a living number. When I came in, it was 175. It was PowerPoint. It wasn't a real plan. I spent most of the day with a lot of the committees about 2 weeks ago talking about the bomber roadmap. And I think we've put some real rigor into that. It's a real plan now. And the path to the right force still leads us through making sure the B-1's viable. It's a re-engineering of the B-52 to get us through that mod game plan. It's keeping the B-2 until we got enough B-21s and making the B-21 program. Everything in the future goes to that path. And I think that's a real path now, and I'm pretty pleased with it. We've had some great conversations with industry, with OSD, and certainly with the Air Force on how we do that. And the Hill's been a big supporter. So we got to continue to push our way through that bow wave to get us to the right mix. The on-ramps to bigger numbers are several years away. And all we can do is pave the path to success. I think what we want to be able to do is make sure that, well, a couple things. One, that what we build is affordable and sustainable and more rapidly modifiable. That keeps us in the game. B-21 will feature all those things. Parts of what we're doing with the B-52 will do that. But I do believe the short-term things we need to do, and we're having some success with, got to bring hypersonics on the bombers sooner. Really pushing hard on that. We're pretty eager for the opportunity to put Arrow in the B-1. I think General Wilsbach and Herrigian would like to see that in their theater sooner than later. I think that particularly interesting twist makes things pretty complicated for our would-be adversaries. So you got to find the good roadmap to the future, smart stuff in the short term, set the conditions for success. And then what I would tell you is I think some are still wanting to have the debate about CBP versus BTF, CONUS to CONUS, whatnot. I would tell you what they should take is the three of us plus CENTCOM are having the conversation, not about whether or not we do these, but how we get really good at it, how really good we can be as integrated staffs, how really good we can be at the bed down, the logistics, and how to really quickly turn the presence into really, no kidding, strong combat capability at the drop of a hat for our teammates there in the AOR.
Very good. Thanks for that. I think you hit on some really important points, particular one being that, there's no, while you can take a snapshot in time, these number requirements evolve as conditions change. And then the idea of tying theaters together, particularly when it comes to bombers, because they are intercontinental capabilities. Let's look back a little bit and ponder where we are today with respect to where we were going back to Desert Storm days. Back then, U.S. commanders had the benefit of nearly unrestricted access to regional bases, few threats to standoff weapons, the ability to operate non-stealth aircraft over much of the battle space, the ability to employ standoff weapons from moderate ranges and relatively static targets. This drove certain assumptions regarding our long-range strike force mix. Generals Wilsbach and Herrigian, how has the return to pure competition altered these assumptions? And what does this portend for long-range strike requirements in your respective AORs? Let's go with General Herrigian first.
Thank you. And again, let me kind of capture that first by talking a little bit about the NDS and GPC. And I think what it does is really gives us the appropriate vision and mindset and culture for what it's going to compete and what you highlight now is the new environment that we've been operating in for the last several years. I guess what I would also offer to the crowd is that, as many of us recognize, the adversary also gets a vote. And in our particular AOR, as you look at what the Russians have done over the last 7 years, basically, if you go back to 2013 for us in Europe, that's when we were going through the European infrastructure consolidation. Then Crimea happened, Georgia, you go to Syria, Libya, look at what they're doing in the high north. And we've had to capture not only the guidance that we received, but also what the adversary has executed here over the last several years, and realize that they were looking to expand their sphere of influence, and we needed to be prepared to compete in a manner that demonstrated our resolve, particularly in our theater here, as we were looking at the different ways in that we were going to assure our partners here in theater. And so for us, and I think General Wilsbach also has a similar view here, is we try to net together the seams that could potentially occur as you look at a stand-in force versus a standoff force. Those are the seams and gaps that we need to pull together. And as you look at the mix and the assumptions that we had made previously, as you look at the mobile targets that are presented to us and the challenges associated with those, you're going to have to find the right mix of capabilities that pull together not only the bomber and the long-range strike force capability, but also those enablers that will facilitate our ability to close the kill chain. And I think as we work through that, and when I say the kill chain, I will highlight that could be both kinetically and non-kinetically. And as we look at those different solutions and dilemmas that we want to provide to the adversary, the goal will be to, in a deliberate fashion, look at it through a mission analysis lens, but also be agile enough to adjust our way of thinking and the capabilities needed in those environments based on what our adversaries do.
Very good. Cruiser?
Yes, sir. Thanks. I completely agree with General Herrigian. And, one of the things that when we look at our AOR, we study China very closely. And I'm not sure that, a lot of America actually studies China that closely, at least as closely as we do. And what I tell people often is go back and look at what they've been doing. Certainly, in our opinion, they're not for the same objective that we are, which is a free and open Indo-Pacific theater. And so that's the threat as we look at it today. And we're very much in agreement with many of our allies and partners that China is interested in dominating the theater and it not being free and open, but rather being in harmony with the way that China wants things to be done. That is the backdrop and the foundation of our competition here. But getting back to your question, you're exactly right. We had freedom of maneuver, and we had very high situational awareness of the battle space. And our competitor, our threat here in the theater has the ability with their current capabilities, and they're getting better very fast every single day at being able to deny that freedom of maneuver, and also the ability to have high situational awareness. And so that's, I go back to my first comment that I made during this VTC, which is, the space dominance and the ability to have the capability of being able to sense the battle space so that you can see those moving targets, so that where the threat is, and you can make real-time decisions on how to maneuver your force to take advantage of what you know is incredibly important. And so as we move forward and we make decisions for our force, the ability to have those things is incredibly important. And General Ray touched on it, but General Brown, our chief, recently put out a paper about accelerating change. And I think that is a fantastic measure that he put into place, almost immediately in his tenure as our chief, because our threat certainly has accelerated their change, and they've gotten very, very good, as have others around the globe. And so as we look forward to what we're going to acquire, we need to make sure that we can sense the battle space, and we can be able to maneuver. And it really gets back to the first question of stand in and stand off. And so the ability to get inside that area that they intend to deny is very important, not only from the standpoint of, if we get called to fight, we will be able to hit our targets, but as a deterrence measure, because if they know that we can actually get inside of their space that they think is denied or want to deny, then that becomes a deterrent value. Thank you.
You bet. While we're on the subject of China, John Wilsbach, let's turn to standoff strikes for a moment. As a PACAF commander, it's your responsibility to deliver airspace and cyber capabilities to conduct ops in an area that covers over half the globe, 60% of the world's population. You know all the statistics. It's a great big area. There must be quite the discussion in Indo-Pacific Command about how far the Chinese can continue to push out the safe line, if you will, from which U.S. forces can launch standoff weapons from the sea or the land. Could you address this a bit in the views of those who think the balance should be heavily weighted in favor of standoff weapons?
Yeah, sure. So as we've seen them advance in the last decade or so, really they've pushed out the ability to target us pretty much everywhere we are inside of the Pacific. And so we absolutely have to be able to fight from in place. So that means being able to defend your locations. In addition, the point that General Ray made about hypersonics is spot on. And the question was, why do you want hypersonics? Because it's really hard to defend if you're trying to defend against a hypersonic weapon. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but basically the time is just cut down immensely to be able to react and to get forces in the right place to defend yourself, not to mention just zeroing in on the kill chain. So that it was a great point by General Ray. But in addition, the ACE concept, Agile Combat Employment, also is another aspect that we're trying to employ here in the Pacific, as well in other places like USAFE. But what that does is it makes it hard for the adversary to have situational awareness of where are your forces, where are they going to, where are they coming from, how long are they going to be there, and it really complicates their ability to target you, which they have the capability if they know where you are. And so that ACE concept is extremely important for us to be able to do, not only us, but our allies and partners. And so as we go around the theater, we've been sharing this concept, and it's actually been met with very positive acceptance by many of our allies because they're interested in this same concept. And it's really a shift in the way that we've been thinking, for many years of how we put forces in the field to fight, and large, very static bases. This agile combat employment moves away from that, becomes much more mobile. Over.
Very good. Thank you. General Herrigian, you're responsible for the air and missile defense of 30 NATO alliance member nations, in addition to commanding U.S. air power for European Command, an area that generates a significant portion of the world's gross domestic product. And as you well know, is being increasingly threatened by an aggressive Russia. In terms of missile defense in a densely populated area, I think our audience would like to hear your perspectives on the relative benefits of long-range and standoff capabilities. What are the risks of weighing the force too heavily on standoff weapons, especially for Air Force operations?
And thanks. As you are very well aware, this is a close one to my heart and my friends here, because clearly our partners want us to have that capability, but they also will freely tell you, and I won't put words in their mouth, that we cannot just be a standoff force. We're going to have to be in here with our partners, demonstrating that we've got skin in the game and that we're going to be here to assure them when the going gets tough. And that's going to start by having that right mix of capabilities that we talked a little bit earlier about. I think as we look at this problem set, as General Wilsbach rightly pointed out, basically we're all under the umbrella, have to operate inside this threat. Arguably, we're a little bit closer, and our friends are a little bit closer, and we're going to be here with them, given the proximity challenges we have of not being able to stand off really at any length that ultimately the Russians, via whether they be undersea capabilities or space capabilities, that we'd have to be particularly aware of. Having said that, I think as we move forward and look at these standoff capabilities and find the right mix, particularly as they're supported from a JADC2 concept that enable the find and fix of some of the more difficult targets that are now presented to us, leveraging that to allow us to get the door open, and then mixed in with a stand-in force that allows us to sustain the door staying open and deliver that air superiority we need to provide to the joint force, that's a credible force. And that's really what we're looking for here in the longer term. And as General Wilsbach highlighted, when you combine that with our agile combat employment, which, like is occurring in PACAF, our partners here are very much interested in how we leverage that together to have not only capabilities, but I think importantly, a concept of operation that we work together that allows us to, number one, compete. And then as we get into those environments that would drive us to actually have to execute the defense of this particular part of the world, we'd be able to do that because we've trained, we've operated together, and we have the interoperability required to execute that mission set.
Very good. General Ray, you and I have chatted a bit about some of the challenges that you face recently, and your work with folks on the Hill and inside the Pentagon, trying to expand insights and perspectives. Now, we know that the other services are investing in new long-range standoff weapons. And as we face a pragmatic reality, the likelihood of a defense budget turndown, do you think it's time for a cross-service review of standoff strike responsibilities and investments from a cost per effect basis? And is this something that might help reduce excess redundancy and wasteful spending in this capability area?
Dave, I'm not quite sure how that would play. I think a lot of that's happening now. What I can tell you is a few things that have really, I guess, worked in our behalf. In COVID, we've shown that with the bomber force, we actually have higher readiness numbers than pre-COVID once we ended CBP. We've been all over the planet in these particular times. We've not needed the access and basing. We're very quick. We think that there's a very significant, real facts on the ground case to be made about what we can do, and the folks I've talked to. I think there's really two dimensions of the roles in mission. One becomes, I go back to the beginning, the nuclear part. I do hear every now and then a roles and missions conversation there. And I think the important part about that is, I think the Department of Defense should pick up those bills because it's the cornerstone of our security structure. I'm comfortable with the caliber of that argument. I'm comfortable that it's having traction. And I can't really talk about why that is, but I'll tell you, I think we're heading in the right direction. And so why would you walk away from success? And if that's the case and the funding goes your direction, then you have a different argument to work your way through, right? I believe we've proven that we can be anywhere we want. I think we can prove very short order that we can even take a stand-in platform and leverage it for standoff. And so your ability to do both of those things, what we can bring with great programs, I think the case is being made every day with the BTFs, the CONUS to CONUS, the programs we're doing, the success we're having in the nuclear part. I think, if you had that conversation, it would be different today than it would have been 2 years ago, because I think of some of the success stories. But in the end, I believe you got to ask yourself, if cruiser needs rapid response to go shoot at targets, I don't think anybody can get there faster with more firepower. If I think about Cobra's situation, he needs some standoff. He's got a lot of good stand-in. I can come help him do that. And we won't talk about the capes of the B-2 or the B-21, but I believe both of these guys would tell you what they offer to the JADC2 part is going to be important, not just for strike, but for the kill chain.
Well, very good. Thanks for that. As we wrap up this session, I'd like to offer each of you a minute or so to make any final thoughts on how the stand-in, stand-off question affects each of your missions and how you view it through strategic, operational, and budgetary lenses. So why don't we start with the cruiser and then Cobra, and then finally T-Ray.
All right, thanks. Well, it's been my pleasure to be here on this panel with my good buddies. And like I said earlier, we talk frequently, and I think that the audience will be probably very interested to know that multiple times a week we're interacting with one another because of all the overlap that we have in our responsibilities. And I'd just like to thank both of them here in public for the support that they offer the Pacific, and let them know that we're there for them as well. But as we go forward, this question about stand-in or standoff for us in the Pacific is key to being able to deter and, if called, to win. And that's exactly what we spend every day thinking about in our headquarters, and how to go forward. And so it's been an honor to be a participant in this forum. Thanks very much, General Deptula. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Same here. Cobra.
Okay, hey, thanks, sir. And let me just pile on to Cruiser's comments there. As he highlighted, when we think about globally integrated operations and the requirement to work together and synchronize our efforts, there are no two finer individuals that I have an opportunity to work with on a daily basis. And so privileged to be a part of this team. And it truly is part of the relationships that we build at our level that make their way down into the staffs that allow us to truly be agile with a capability that is critically important to frankly all our AORs. And this discussion really drives home the point to me that as we look at the broader mission set of air superiority and the critical role that bombers play from both a standoff perspective in a stand-in perspective, I completely agree that we've got to continue this conversation. And there's no, this isn't going to be a math problem we solve overnight. This is going to take time. It's going to take analysis and a thoughtful discussion about finding the right balance that facilitates our ability to deliver the capabilities that, as Cruiser highlighted, allows us to compete at a level that our adversaries don't want to go there. That's what we want to deliver here. And that's what I think collectively we're driving toward together as a team. So again, thank you for the opportunity and look forward to this continued discussion.
Yes, sir. Final words to you, T-Ray.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell here, Dave, that the teamwork is incredible, and all the folks on the net should take that as one of the biggest deliverables, is that there is a lot of great work and alignment in the way we think. And I think we're making some really great progress on the behalf of partners and allies in the department. We've done what we could to play the only allied bomber force that we have, as well as we could based on the conditions. I think we've got the right mindset. We've done some great work to build a better plan for the bombers. But again, I'm just going to go back to, it doesn't matter if we can't get agile combat employment right, JADC2 right, the multi-domain operations, we don't get space right, it's not relevant. I do believe that this team, just for an example, it's the three of us, they're going to figure out conventional nuclear integration, not somebody else. It's because we get how to operate, we get how to manage risk, we get how to integrate, and really how to compete at the strategic to operational level. And so I think at the end of the day, we've got a very strong narrative and a lot of good progress to go prove that this is really how we want to get after this. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Well, we've come to the end of this special Aerospace Nation. Gentlemen, it really was an honor to host you today at AFA's virtual Aerospace and Cyber Conference. And we thank you all most sincerely for what you do to help defend our nation. And thank you to all of you who tuned in to watch this special Mitchell Institute panel on U.S. Air Force stand-in, stand-off capabilities and how to balance that mix. Please be sure to check out AFA's daily report for the latest coverage on virtual ASC. And with that, have a great aerospace power kind of day.